Welcome back to Bagels and Locks. Good to have you guys with us here today as we start our second episode. My name is Brandon Rothenberg, alongside my co-host today, Jason Silverstone. Quite an exciting weekend of sports. We saw a little bit of action in the Korean baseball organization, some real sports that we haven't had in some time now. We also had some new episodes of The Last Dance, and the UFC was back in action. So, Jason, let's catch up for a little bit. How have you been doing, and what's been on your plate? What's going on?
I've been doing pretty good, Brandon. As you said about the KBO, the Korean Baseball Organization, I've been watching some of those games, not all of them. Some of them are around 1 a.m., so it's something you can fall asleep to. Others are, they start around 5:30. So I'm not staying up that late. I did watch some of the UFC this weekend, which was honestly phenomenal. Pretty interesting without fans. But I've just been kind of relaxing, enjoying my time off, and I'm excited to dive into episode 2.
Yeah, sure, me too. I have 2K19. I don't have the newest 2K. I don't see the biggest difference in buying like the next sports game, the most updated and newest one, because you're paying $60 for pretty much roster updates, and you can easily do that within the game. People like upload rosters, even like throwback crazy rosters, and so I had 2K19 lying around. I never created my player, and I decided to do so this weekend. And he's 64 or 65 now. Power forward
Overall.
and overall, yes.
I thought you were saying years old for a second. I was like, I don't know how you could even make your my player that old.
No. Unfortunately, 2K has yet to expand on the age limit. I want to say he's 21. Just signed a 2-year deal with the Pistons for 1,000 VC. So
that's awesome. Last time we talked, you were on the Shanghai Bears, I believe.
Yes, the Shanghai Bears. And what's crazy about that is our first game of the season, with my first game with the Shanghai Bears, the game went into double overtime, and I had like 30-something points, and I thought like, okay, this is because the way it's like the prelude and the way it works is everything is kind of like planned out in a sense, like in terms of when you sub in and whatnot. So I thought like whatever happens, like happens, but like that game went into double overtime, and it was crazy. It was super exciting. And we won, I want to say. But right now the Pistons are 2-1. We just lost a tough game to the 76ers. And I will keep everyone updated with how my season is going. And we hope
What's your, just out of curiosity, what's your like archetype? Like what position are you?
So I'm a power forward, and I want to say I'm averaging 20 points a game. It's tough because
coming off the bench.
Yes, I'm coming off the bench.
20 off the bench that's great production.
I mean, I'm kind of a team player. Like I'll have an assist every now and then, but if I have the ball in my hands, I'm going to try and score. And it's a lot of fun. Although the one thing about it is it gets boring in a sense, because you kind of want to play as the entire team. Like after a while, if you just playing as you're my player, you know what I mean? It gets a little boring. You want to play as everybody else. But that's just the way it goes, I guess, in my player. It's a long season, a long schedule ahead. Unfortunately, this week we lost a legend in Jerry Stiller. I know that we had previously talked about this classic guy. Did you ever watch King of Queens?
I didn't watch King of Queens that often, but I have seen a ton of Seinfeld, which he played George Costanza's dad in. So I've definitely seen my fair share of him, and that is a tough loss in the TV, movie, and comedy community.
Yeah, that right there was his OG start was in Seinfeld, although he started in the 50s. Because he was an old dude. He was 92. So he had some throwback comedy that I wouldn't assume that you had watched, because everything was probably in black and white. But I watched King of Queens, and I love that show, and he was just a great character, a great guy, and he was in Zoolander, who actually played Ben Stiller's dad in the movie. And yeah, he was it's a tough loss. Tough loss to the Jewish community. All right, Jason. So let's talk some baseball. We've been who knows how long without it. Actually, I'll tell you, I was at some of the last games that when baseball was played last because I was in Arizona over spring break, and I went to the Angels and Cubs game at Sloan Park, which is a new spring training stadium, the new Cubs stadium in Mesa, Arizona. Really nice. It's like 2 or 3 years old. It's built to look a lot like Wrigley's. You can see I have my ticket here.
Yep. Who won that one?
Well, we left after the 7th inning. I think the Cubs did win. But that was cool because that game, they had ESPN there, and what they were doing a lot during spring training, and they started this last year, this trend of miking up players during at-bats and when they're out in the field. And it's really cool because they say in baseball, like, whenever you come into the game, or if it's like your first game back, like the ball is always hit right at you. That's just what they say. So it was funny to see, like, when a guy was mic'd up in the outfield or somewhere in the field and he's talking to, like, Matt Vasgersian and A-Rod in the booth, that he would immediately get the ball hit to him. So they were there, and they had mic'd up, like, Rizzo and Chris Bryant. And but, yeah, I mean, it's been way too long. But there is signs of hope as the news broke that on Tuesday, MLB has plans. It's been approved by owners that the season will be returning. They say that it will be an 82-game season, and it'll be played regionally. So we don't necessarily know what that means until the information is actually provided to the public. And they had talked before about playing in Arizona and in Florida, but it seemed like that was sort of foiling out at the time.
Yeah, I would imagine that if it were to happen, it might all be in Florida just because of the fact that sports are considered an essential business in the state of Florida, which is why they're allowed to have the UFC events. I don't know if Arizona has come out, their government has come out making a formal statement about that. But one thing I kind of want to go back to, which you brought up, was about the players being mic'd up. And I remember watching spring training, and I totally honestly forgot about that until you just mentioned it. But I mean, I'm just surprised this is the first year the MLB is kind of doing that. You know, the NFL has that, and the NBA has that, and there's so many great personalities and cool guys that are actually in the MLB playing baseball. And as people have been watching the KBO matches, they've had a bunch of former players and current players come in and kind of give some insight and tell some stories. And it's just really nice to see them as players and kind of hear about their personal experiences and what's going on in their lives.
Yeah, I've always liked how they had, like, if you're watching a Tigers game, they'll have a former player, like Torrey Hunter will be in the booth talking to, at the time, Mario and Rod. But it's cool to have this side of baseball where, and it doesn't even have to be players live in the field, because they'll always have, interviews with, I remember, like, Fox Sports, they would have, or MLB on Fox on Saturdays, they would, like, broadcast games. And when they would cover the Tigers, they always interviewed JV. And I don't know how well you're familiar with the situation or scenario, but, like, every time that they had interviewed Verlander, like, during the interview, like, the Tigers always did well. Like, someone got a home run or base hit. It was crazy. And they brought it up numerous times. But yeah. It'd be really cool if that was something that they established. I mean, it'd be difficult to do it this season with the scenario we're already in, but further down the road, maybe next year, if they implemented that full time, what would that look like, and how many games would that take place? And that would be really something special that would draw in a new audience to watch baseball games.
Definitely, because I mean, as much as it is a sport, it's also an entertainment business, and there's a lot of fans that would definitely enjoy that and would definitely add to the broadcast. And what I thought you were going to say, rather than the Tigers playing well while JV was being interviewed, was about how they'd be interviewing these guys in the dugout, and while they were giving their interview, their teammates would be like messing with them or throwing peanuts at them or all
Yeah,
that type of stuff. And I've always found that stuff hilarious. So I would look forward to and would definitely enjoy them incorporating more of that into their broadcasts.
right. Yeah, well, only time will tell with that one, but that's something that I think Major League Baseball should consider for down the road. So if there's like they're saying that baseball would return in July, it would start like 4th of July weekend, which is an awesome time to return. Like think about that down the road
Yeah.
after going X amount of time without baseball and for it to return around like the best time of the year, the summertime, and it's 4th of July. There wouldn't be the All-Star game, which totally makes sense. So, and it was supposed to be played in Los Angeles, so I don't know when it would be rescheduled because they always have it played out a couple years in advance as to where the All-Star games are played.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of tough for LA in that sense. But something that I wanted to bring up was they're talking about having this universal designated hitter between the two leagues and how that plays into effect and why it initially plays into effect. So I want to know, what are your thoughts on baseball potentially adding a universal DH for this season?
Well, personally, I mean, you would think on the surface that it would but definitely benefit American League teams more than it would benefit the National League teams just because they build their roster more around a designated hitter who's going to play more games during the year. Um, but at the same time, I think it definitely makes a lot more sense than making the league universally with a pitcher that's batting, because there's a lot of teams that don't prepare for that or have that. However, every team is prepared with multiple hitters and possible DHs, and I also think it'll definitely allow us for probably to see some more runs, some more scoring, and more offense. And, there's nobody that's ever left a baseball game saying, man, I wish they scored 4 less runs this game. That was horrible. So
Right.
I definitely think that the universal DH would be a really cool thing for them to implement. And this is the perfect time to test out and try out something like that with an abbreviated season.
Yeah, I was totally going to say, because that's something that's been brought up for years and years, and it's always like, well, when could it happen? And now it's a great fit, but it's also taking place solely because if they decide that baseball won't be played in each team's respective home stadium,
Which is
that
looking more likely every day.
right, because of that, and considering that it might be played in like 2 states, maybe Arizona and Florida, we don't know yet. But because that's the case, that there has to be a universal DH. And in a way, it does take away some of the excitement in a sense. Like there's nothing like seeing a pitcher either get a hit for the first time or home run, and you see
Yeah.
guys like Madison Bumgarner, who's one of the best hitting pitchers.
Hmm.
That and it does take away from the game, but it's also going to be interesting to see how teams work around this and how, if this is implemented full time permanently, what it could look like for those National League teams that will now get the chance to have a designated hitter for the first time.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about, you know, obviously in the National League because pitchers are hitting, if GMs and coaches and managers and all that stuff are looking for pitchers who can also, hit the ball and would potentially take a certain pitcher over a different one just because they're better at the plate. We're actually watching an interview with Jeff Fisher, who's the former coach of the Tennessee Titans and the Rams in the NFL. And he said when he was making decisions about punters on his roster, he would always look for, obviously, first you want a guy that can punt the ball, but the second most important thing to him was how good his arm strength was and how accurate he was throwing the football. Because Jeff Fisher loved to attempt going for it on a trick play, 4th and 7, 4th and 8, whatever, and try to get that first down. So I've always wondered whether National League teams kind of skew that way and try and get pitchers who can also hit, and if this DH rule is going to be implemented universally how that will affect the way teams recruit and trade for certain guys.
Yeah, you talk about trading for players and trying to work around, a team where they've been used to having no designated hitter and how that could benefit them. Because you look at guys who maybe are sort of at the end of their careers, but they can still hit. Maybe they shouldn't be in the field. I think of Victor Martinez. Joe Mauer at the end of his career was playing a little bit of first base, but those are kind of guys that were, predominantly leading in the hitting department, so to say. And it makes more sense for a team in the National League to make a trade for one of those guys, whereas before they would have no use for someone like that. So I wanted to bring up something that was funny that had happened a few days ago. So Trevor Bauer, who's a pitcher for the Cincinnati Reds, he's known as one of the oddest guys in baseball, not in a bad way, but he's very I don't know what you would call it. Strange.
I would say strange, but I would also say he's definitely one of the more vocal guys in the MLB, and he's not afraid to share his opinion on, what's going on in the league. We heard a lot about him during the Astros scandal. He's not afraid to share what's going on in his mind.
Yeah. Yes. He like infamously cut his finger because he was flying his drone during the playoffs. And he's also got a podcast. He has like a TV show, and he's on a lot of podcasts. And you're right, he's not afraid to voice his opinion, especially on what happened with the Astros and that whole scenario. But he was being interviewed on ESPN the other day, and the ESPN, I don't know how no one caught this, but they had his phone number at the top of the screen.
Well, I wouldn't say nobody caught it.
Well, I'm saying the people.
Nobody at ESPN.
Producers,
yeah. Okay.
Right. No one at ESPN. So this obviously became news to Bauer after the interview, and so he kind of poked fun at it. And we're going to read some of these tweets here. So he had said, "Didn't account for my voicemail filling up so quickly for those who couldn't get in." So he basically created a giveaway. Like he made fun of the whole scenario and decided to have some fun with it. And he was giving away a signed baseball and game used cleats, and you had to follow him on Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to his YouTube channel, which is a little ridiculous because
that's a lot.
Yeah, for what it is, it's a lot. And then he was going to pick one random winner. So of course I followed him on Instagram, and then I subscribed to him on YouTube because it would be cool. You never know. But then what was funny was he had tweeted out a few hours after that. He had said, "Answering y'all space times for a bit. You get one question. Screenshots and recordings are encouraged. Rest in peace to my phone." I texted him and never got a response. You want to know what I texted him?
Yeah, sure.
I said, "Hey Trevor, Taco Bell or Wendy's, and why?" And I said that because I figured any text that he may have seen, everything was probably like baseball related or something stupid. And so I thought, well, if I was him and I was scrolling through 1,000 messages and I came across something like that, like Taco Bell or Wendy's, I would laugh and be like, I'm going to reply to this guy. But I didn't get a reply, and I tried calling him, and I didn't get any answer.
So I got a question for you: Taco Bell or Wendy's, and why?
Okay. I was not expecting that. Well, usually I'd have to say Taco Bell, just because it's always when I crave fast food, it's the first thing I think was Taco Bell. But Wendy's chicken nuggets and Frosties are great. Like that, you can't get that anywhere else. But I know you like the shredded quesadillas, the mini ones from Taco Bell.
But that's not me. You got me confused with someone else.
You're lying.
I swear. I mean, I don't mind them, but that's that's not my thing.
What? We've totally talked about this before. That it's the greatest. Maybe it's Jeremy. I don't know. I'll tell you what, though. They're solid. They're really good. It's $1. Okay, it might be crap, but they hit different. No matter what, it's a Friday night, Tuesday afternoon. Get them while they're hot. They are good.
You definitely don't want them cold.
No. To answer your question, I would have to say Taco Bell.
All right. So Now I think we'll talk about, if obviously everyone's missing the season right now, if there's one guy that you wish was playing right now to watch, who would it be and why?
Well, for me as a Tigers fan, the obvious answer is Miguel Cabrera. It seems that every spring training, someone always says, "Oh, look at Miggy. He's lost weight. He looks the best he's ever looked. He's healthy. He's swinging the ball well." Which that was the case again this spring. He looked solid. He looked like he lost weight. And I don't know if you'd seen the game, but we were playing the Yankees, and Garrett Cole was on the mound. It was like his second or third start, and we crushed him. Like Cabrera hit 2 homers off him. Travis Demerit, a guy we got in the trade last season, was hit 2 home runs off Cole too. And I mean, we were granted spring training doesn't really count, but Miggy, man, he looked good, and he's got some milestones too. Like he's got like 2,800 hits, so he's 200 away from, um, 3,000 career hits, close to 500 homers. I mean, it sucks because he's getting up there in age, and he always gets hurt, and something always happens, and we miss him for like 2 months of the season, and I think it's a bummer. So I hope that if baseball does come back, that Cabrera's been in good shape, so he's been working out. He hasn't been eating too many snacks because it's quarantine and there's not much to do other than, probably hit the ball off the tee and get his reps in. But I really miss seeing Cabrera.
I'm not going to lie to you, Brandon. That was about to be my answer. And for the same exact reason, just because every spring training they make a big deal about how he's in the best shape of his life and he's cut all this weight. And I'm surprised he hasn't evaporated yet because he's lost so much weight every spring training. I mean, we've been hearing this story for 10 years and he never, he is not really, he's sort of a shell of his former self, unfortunately, but he was looking really good in spring training. And it's always crazy to me, for all the Tiger games I've been to, watching him hit, it's just like you're literally watching one of the best hitters to ever play the game, and it blows my mind every single time. But because you gave that answer, I will change my answer, and I will say Hyun-Jin Ryu, who just signed a 4-year, $80 million deal with the Toronto Blue Jays.
Rex.
This is a guy who I absolutely loved watching last year as a pitcher. I mean, he was no one could hit off this guy. I mean, he was just electric last year, and I just loved watching him and loved cheering on the Dodgers. And I'm just really curious to see how he's going to fit in with the Blue Jays and how that team's going to do with him. And also last year, I read an article about him saying like between starts and stuff, he never threw the ball. Like he wouldn't get
Mm-hmm.
throws in. He would just go out there and pitch, which is interesting because, a lot of pitchers want to do that to stay loose and whatever and, make sure they're good to go. But from the other perspective, it's kind of like he's saving that arm. Like he has way less pitches on that arm than any other guy.
Yeah.
Um, and another reason why I'm excited to see him is because he's actually a former KBO player, and I've been watching a lot of the KBO recently, and I've just had kind of like a greater appreciation for him in that league as a whole and everything he did in there. I was doing a little bit of research the other day. His first year in the league, he won Rookie of the Year, he won MVP, he got a Golden Glove and the pitching Triple Crown, which is leader in ERA, wins, and strikeouts. So it's just crazy to think of how much of an animal this guy was, and he's finally starting to gain some traction and some attention over in the MLB. And I'm just excited to see what he can do when we get back to baseball.
Yeah, Ryu's a great choice. He was quietly like the best pitcher on the Dodgers pitching staff last season. And you're looking at guys like Kershaw, who, I mean, granted, he's always going to be in the spotlight, but for a guy like Ryu, who's a lefty, and he's not going to throw 97, 98 and get you out
No.
on the high heat. He's a guy who could really locate his pitches well, and he'll get you on the off speed. But I mean, maybe it has something to do with that not throwing in between starts, because that's rather uh, unusual in baseball, especially among pitchers, because you got to always keep your arm loose. So that's strange that that's the case for Ryu. But hey, it works for him.
It
What's
also
cool?
makes me wonder, with this quarantine and everything going on, no spring training. Is he throwing right now? Is he not throwing right now? What is this quarantine looking like for a guy who does not typically throw in between starts? Because it's definitely got to be somewhat different from what everyone else is doing or from what he's used to doing. So whatever it is, it's unorthodox.
Yeah, that's a valid point. You see a lot of guys will post, the bullpens that they're throwing right now or different players like hitting off a tee, but Ryu, man, he could quietly be doing nothing and it could be working wonders for him. I guess we won't know till the season starts.
All right, so that wraps up our baseball discussion for this week. Now we are going to move into our winners and losers of this week's episodes of The Last Dance. So, Brandon, you are going to lead us off with your first winner of this week's episodes.
My first winner of last night, winners, plural, was the Warner Brothers Studios employees. And I bring that up because they had talked about how when Jordan was filming Space Jam, that he obviously felt like he had to be training at the same time. He couldn't just be out there filming the movie and not doing any sort of working out or getting in shape for the season. So they had built the studio, or sorry, not the studio. They built the gym for him, and with complete with basketball court and weight room and everything he needed. And they talked about and showed how Jordan would bring in players to play games of pickup, and he'd talk about playing numerous pickup games after he'd go through his lines and whatnot. And the other thing too is his schedule was ridiculous, man. I mean, he'd wake up at like 7 a.m. They'd start filming for a couple hours. He'd get his reps in, come back, film some more, like long, long days. And I can only imagine what it would be like working at the studio because Jordan was having, not only is that cast of that movie, incredible. You have Bill Murray and all the Charles Barkley and everybody else is in that movie, Larry Bird. So you're seeing all these players coming in, but at the same time, you have guys that are playing pickup. Some of the game's best that are in there playing pickup. And so I just think it'd be funny, like for anybody who worked there. I mean, even the janitors, like you're just seeing all these legends coming in playing basketball, and who knows, maybe you were lucky enough to hop in on the action yourself and play some pickup.
Yeah, that would definitely be an awesome experience, and probably not something a lot of the staff was really thinking about at the time, because Jordan sort of engineered those pickup games himself. So definitely kind of like a right place, right time sort of situation there.
Yeah.
All right, so now moving on to my winner of last night. I am declaring the 1993-1994 Chicago Bulls my winner of last night. And it's funny because they really shouldn't be, because they're like the one of the few teams in this Bulls teams in this documentary that doesn't end up winning an NBA championship. However, this team was the one without Michael Jordan while he was playing baseball, and they ended up going 55-27 with no Michael. And a lot of the experts, a lot of the analysts predicted them to not even make the playoffs that year, because obviously if you lose, who's considered the greatest player of all time, your teams should definitely not be as good. And they actually only lost a couple extra games that year, and they made a good run in the playoffs. And if you watch that part of the documentary and listen to the guys talking about it, a lot of them are like, yeah, like it was so much fun. We were moving the ball. Everyone was getting involved. Everyone was getting points. And so I think that's a big win for that year of the Chicago Bulls specifically, and kind of like a subtle win for Jerry Krause, because he was trying to engineer this team at the time to be successful. So that was my winner of last night's episodes.
Yeah, it's almost like a great precursor for that 95-96 season, because this is the first time they're playing without the greatest player in the world, and you have some of the guys who maybe weren't seeing the ball as much, like Steve Kerr, really get to show what they're made of. And considering once you have that, and then you go to the 95-96 season and Jordan returns and things start to pick up pace again.
Mm-hmm.
These guys are sort of used to playing amongst each other without Jordan, and they were used to that. It's funny, too, how they also had mentioned what it was like without Jordan, and because a lot of it is they kind of point him out to be the bad guy in a sense, in terms of being a good teammate, yelling at the players and whatnot. So it's funny to see their reactions and talk about what it was like playing without Jordan. So my loser for the list of the episodes last night is the number 45. This is a picture that Bleacher Report tweeted that I thought was hysterical.
It's pretty good.
That top picture is like a pair of Jordans you'd buy somewhere in Chinatown or maybe eBay for half the price. Looking rather thick, if you ask me. So when Jordan returned in 95, he switched his number to 45 because his father had just passed, and this was after he retired for the first time. So he didn't want to wear that 23 because he felt like it wasn't right because his dad wasn't there to watch him anymore. And unfortunately for Jordan, that number change wasn't the greatest of moves on his end, solely because he just wasn't playing as well as he used to. The Bulls were playing the Magic in the playoffs. Jordan had the ball stolen away by Nick Anderson at the last 10 seconds, eventually blowing the game, and that led to Anderson saying, I couldn't have done that to number 23. And he basically said, 45 is not 23. And MJ has ticked him off, as we've seen this motif throughout the series of anytime anybody kind of calls him out on things that he's like, no, like immediately comes back and becomes this incredibly competitive, like, no way that dude just said that. I'm going to fully do the opposite sort of mentality. And because of that, Jordan changed his number back to 23, brought it out of retirement. And that cost the Bulls, too, because that was a $25,000 fine for Jordan to switch numbers, which I didn't know. And that's quite the hefty fine, considering he was only changing numbers. I don't see why that's such a big deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it might have had something to do with bringing the number back out of retirement or something, but I don't really know. $25,000 is a lot to, me and you and everyone else, but if you're an NBA franchise, it's not that big of a price to pay to have Michael Jordan start playing at the level that he was playing at in
Right.
number 23.
And when he made the switch, it was like, he's back. Like he said in the facts, I'm back.
Yep. And so up next is the last loser of this week's episode, and for that I chose Steve Kerr, and that was because he got punched in the eye by Mike in practice after kind of talking trash to him, and he even said in the documentary, I was great at talking trash but not very good at backing it up. And that just sounds like an annoying person to me. Like what is the point of talking trash if you can't back it up? You just kind of sound like a little brat and pretty annoying. And then in addition to that, later on in the documentary, he made a comment about the 95-96 team, and they were talking about how it was the most winningest team in NBA history. They broke the record for most wins in a season, and they asked Steve Kerr how he felt about it, and he was like, yeah, that was the best team that I ever played for. Like, really, Steve Kerr? I'm shocked to hear you say that. The team that had the most wins ever in the history of the NBA was the best team you played for? Like, of course it was. I don't know. I was kind of getting fed up with Steve Kerr last night. He was rubbing me the wrong way. Obviously rubbed MJ the wrong way, punched him in the face.
Mm-hmm.
But, I just think between the punch and the bonehead comment he made, he was a loser of last night's episode.
All right, Jason. So we've been talking basketball. We've been talking Last Dance. What better way to sort of tie this all in with bringing on our special guest, Eli Hammer, who not only is one of our close buddies, but was the student manager for the MSU men's basketball team this year. So we're going to learn a little bit about what he got to do and his insight from being in the locker room every day with the team and some of his tasks that he had at hand. So let's take a look.
And now we welcome on very special guest, a good friend of both mine and Brandon's, Eli Hammer. Eli was one of the MSU basketball team's managers this past season. So Eli, man, just first of all, how you doing? How's quarantine going? How's life?
I'm doing great, man. Doing best as I can. Not much to do out here. This is as exciting as it gets. Just hanging out with my friends Brandon and Jason.
We hear you got a new dog, though.
I did get a new dog, little baby Kodak. Been training him. It's a good 8 hours a day right there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that gives you something to do right off the bat.
Yeah.
Talk about not having much to do. I know you're playing some Fortnite, though. You're kind of hopping back on the video game train. I'm sure you're playing some 2K, too, because I know you miss basketball.
Yep. I just joined the 2K league. I've been playing online a little bit. Got the 4th seed right now. So.
Not bad. Always good to be in contention for the ship.
Yes, sir.
All right, so I guess we'll jump into it now. So, first question, Hammer. On a scale from 1 to 10, how scared are you of Tom Izzo?
Honestly, 1. Maybe the first week or so it was up there closer to a 10, but over time he's just a guy, just a boss doing his job.
For sure. So I personally know this story, and I think it's a good one. I know a lot of our listeners would find it pretty interesting, but tell us the story about you being in the team picture with Draymond Green.
Yeah, so that was it. I totally kind of forgot about that. Thank you for bringing that up. It's a great memory. So there was one day, I believe it was a Thursday. It was the only day I had to miss practice. And because I had class, and I showed up to practice very late, just expecting kind of everything to be over with. And I walk in the gym, and the first thing I see is just everyone huddled up in the middle of the court, and they start yelling, "Eli, come here, Eli." I'm just like, what's going on? Like, my backpack's on. I just throw it off, and I run into the picture. And I'm like, all right, like, just take a picture. And after I look at someone, I was like, what was that about? And they were like, oh, nothing, just Draymond's here. And ended up being in a picture with Draymond. I'm like, oh, cool. What's up, Draymond?
How did you not notice that he was there in the first place? Like, where were you were you behind? Because I just feel like you would have seen him and been like, oh my God, like, Draymond's here. We're taking the team pick.
Well, it was just like 40 people. It was like chaotic. Everyone was just yelling, like, take off your backpack, get in here. And I'm just like, all right. They just jumped in.
Wow, that's awesome. Did you get to talk to him after, or like say what up to him, or did he?
Yeah, I got to say what up. Exit? He came a few times throughout the year, just to mentor the guys a little bit and whatnot. So I got to say what up a few times.
Yeah, he had plans. He had to get to Harper's, or he had to get to Dublin.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see him there, but you never know.
So, Eli, walk us through, what was your first game day experience like? What were some of the emotions that you were feeling? Were you nervous? Were you scared, excited? Kind of tell us about how you felt.
I mean, I was definitely nervous going into it. I mean, the first thing you see is just 20,000 or whatever fans in the crowd, and being on the court, like, you think everyone's staring at you and that you're going to mess up and whatnot. But I mean, once you're there, it's crazy to like think about, but you might notice from being on the court and fields at games, like, you really don't notice the crowd. Like, your eyes are on the game and you're just so focused, and it's just like such a great atmosphere. The only time you notice the crowd is when it's just like stupid loud, pretty much. And
right.
The first game specifically was awesome because it was versus Albion, the exhibition game. So it wasn't a real game, but it was still a first game day experience. And just like the whole scene with Cassius and his family and all that, it was just a great first game day experience, I would say.
Did you feel in that moment as if, like, how you felt if you were like playing in an actual game, like a game that had importance, you felt on like that same level of nerves, those butterflies?
Honestly, the first game, no. I thought I was just kind of a whatever dude, but as the season went on, it felt more so like it was our games because we got more into it, and the managers kind of had our pregame routines and we would get ourselves hyped up. So as the season went on, I'd say it got even more so like, game day mood for us.
Yeah, I feel as if, though, that there were instances where you knew that we were at the games or somebody else was at the game, and we'd always be like taking pictures of you or shouting you out. Like, in that moment, obviously, if you feel like you got eyes on you in that sense, but yeah, with so many people at those games, you're not the main focus of attention.
Yeah, definitely. I learned that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I don't have anyone chanting, "Put Eli in," whatnot.
Yet.
Yet.
How was your journey to becoming a manager different than the usual path that most of the other guys that were managers on the team took?
Well, a lot of people, not just at Michigan State, I mean, it's kind of a thing around the whole country. To get into the sports industry in general, a lot of people have connections. And that's something I didn't have going into college. So I kind of went out of my way, to introduce myself to a lot of the staff on the team, whether it was going to the manager tryouts for the first 3 years or just popping my head in, sending an email whenever I could. I was just extremely persistent. And I take pride in that. I try sharing that story with others to get them motivated. Just there's not one path to do anything. I took my own path to become a manager. And, my parents pushed me to do that, and now I'm going to push others to do it.
That's awesome. And if I remember correctly, you weren't like an official manager on the team yet for the summer leading up to this past season, but then you sort of had a funny interview experience with the other managers. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so after all those emails, as you said, I was kind of a unofficial manager for the summer. That was when all the rest of the managers had to go home. They had summer jobs and they needed extra hand. So they kind of got to know me over the summer, those 3 months, and they were pushing me to come out to tryouts, but no guaranteed spot. They kept telling me that kind of stuff. And so that got me nervous for tryouts. I worked my hardest to prepare for it. And then I walk into the final interview and, the managers just look at me and they're just like, you go out to bars? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, yeah, like, we want you already. So we don't really have anything to ask you. I'm like, all right. And then I go to the next room and my soon-to-be supervisor is just on the spot, just offered me the job. So that was very relieving, after a summer's worth of hard work.
Yeah.
That's awesome. You're go ahead, Brandon.
No, I was just going to say for you, like after being so persistent and really trying so hard to get that role for it to finally pay off, I can only imagine what it was like for you in that moment of like, wow, everything finally paid off. And here I am, and we've got quite a season ahead of us and quite the long road.
Definitely. I mean, especially being preseason number 1 at the time, super exciting.
So walk us through some of your responsibilities game day versus practice and how they differ from one another.
Definitely. So practice is every day after class. And as a manager, you just got to get there early, set up, make sure all the players are taken care of, all that. And then after, you stay, rebound for players if they need it, you clean up. If coaches need anything, you help them out. So really practice days is kind of just you do practice and then whatever's helped or needed around, And then game days is very specific tasks throughout the day. You got shoot around, pregame meal. I would have to set up the water coolers a lot of times, things like that. It's very like set schedule for the day. So
and if tip-off's at 7:00, what time would you say you're at the Breslin?
Probably at the Breslin for 7:00 game from like 1 to 10, maybe 11 that day.
Wow. Those are really long days.
Yeah, very.
That's
but
crazy.
It's fun. You're shooting around, then you got the game. Everything's back to back, so it's a fun day still.
Speaking of shooting around, is there anyone on the team that you think you could give a serious run for their money in a game of one-on-one?
Oh, Cassius Winston. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, you think so? You'd be willing to put money on it, and like, there's a solid chance that you could walk away with some extra cash in your pocket?
Yeah, no, definitely not. No, none of I can't beat any of the players. I mean, people even underestimate the walk-ons, but those guys all had D2 offers, scholarship offers, even some mid-major scholarship offers. Like they're ballers. People don't see that.
Kind of going back to what Brandon said about those kind of first game jitters and nerves a little bit. And you discussed a little about how you were nervous going into the interview, even though you worked with a lot of the guys and the team throughout the summer. So my question for you is, like, at what point in the season, or if it might have been even before the season, did you feel comfortable and you belonged in the gym with these guys and, didn't feel like a guest there anymore and really felt like you were a member of the team?
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about that. But one specific moment that stands out to me has to be the last day of summer. Nobody knew if I was going to be back or not. The players all knew my situation. And in the huddle at the end of practice, Coach Izzo gave me a little shout out. And the players, like threw me in the middle of the huddle, put their hands on me like, Eli, Eli.
That's
and
awesome.
So, that was hype. That was just like looking back in the summer. I didn't know like if they all liked me the whole time. I was nervous. And then at that point, I was like, oh, I do want this. I feel like I belong here. So that was a cool moment for me.
So you had mentioned that you were at, on some game days, you'd be for a 7 o'clock game, you're there at 1 o'clock and you're there till 11 in the evening. So what were some of the ways that you balance your time between going to practice and games and managing your schoolwork?
That was never really a huge issue for me. I'm not going to lie. I was always on top of my work. I had kind of a rule for myself throughout college that I didn't work like past 8 o'clock at night, so if I was going to be at work until 8, I would get my work done beforehand. I'm not good at working at night. I didn't want to. So I was always good at just making sure I had it done. That was thankfully never a huge issue for me. And also, I had 3 years to adjust to college before I had this full-time job. So that helped too.
That's true. Yeah, you totally have your time management skills down pat.
Yeah.
So obviously, no one's happy about the way this season ended and it being cut short, right before the conference tournaments and March Madness as a whole. So I was just wondering, how you feel about that, being a manager of the team, and how well do you think MSU would have done in the tournament? Obviously, no one really knows, but
it was heartbreaking, to be honest. Like, it sucked. I felt like I deserved it. My 1 year, like all the players as seniors felt like they deserved it. And everyone thought Michigan State had a chance to win it all. So that was like really devastating, to never be able to know. And we were just about to get on the bus, after an hour after they broke the news, we were about to get on the bus to go to the Big Ten tournament. So besides just the games, like all the managers were excited to have a weekend in Indianapolis, just all that. But I can't complain too much. There's people out there that have it way worse than me. There's players who got 1 year of college and they lost it. So the manager happening to me, I got a conference championship ring, so it's all good.
Yeah, that's a ring is definitely nothing to complain about.
Yep.
So Eli, you spent a lot of time with these players in the summer and throughout the season. Is there any sort of conversation that you had with a player or a coach that really sticks out to you?
You got me thinking.
Not necessarily a bad thing here.
Yeah. I guess one random thing is so I was sitting with the player. We were just like chatting, about life. And then one of the coaches walks over and was just like, "Hey, I'm just curious, like, what's your hobbies?" And the player looks at him. He's like, "I like boating." He's like, "Really? You like boating?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's my favorite thing to do. I love going on a boat." And he was like, "More than basketball?" He's like, "Yeah, I get to relax on the boat. Like, basketball's work. I love it, but boating's my favorite." And that was pretty much it for the coach. Like, he was like, "Okay, cool," and walked away. And then I'm thinking, like, dang, like, I thought you were supposed to play basketball 12 hours a day, to make it to this point. So that's just, like, something that stands out. Again, I brought up earlier, they're all just normal dudes. Just, like, talking to them, getting to know them, you really just realize that. And even some of them are, like, younger than us. Most of them are. Yeah. So it's, like, weird to look up to them almost.
Yeah. That's a solid point because sometimes we forget these things, and even though they're college athletes, we may think that basketball is their life, and it has been their life. And being a good player in college, where you could potentially move on to the pros, is a key stage in your life, because if you don't play well now, I mean, you're never going to make it to the league. You've already gotten this far.
Kind of going back to the season, at least this is my experience watching MSU, but it seems like each year the team is clicking like just right at the right time, kind of right before the conference tournament and before March Madness. So I was wondering if you felt that the team this year was coming together in a similar sort of way. And if so, how does the coaching staff and everyone prepare the players and the team to get to that point?
You know, that was something I looked out for this year. Like, because everyone talks about, is March is Izzo's month, and I was trying to like find that switch of when do we click, and I noticed us like clicking more towards the end, but I honestly have no idea why. I didn't see anything different that we were doing in practice or anything like that. It was just happening. It was cool to watch, but I was trying to find something like the one specific thing that made it happen. I don't think there was anything. Just as the season goes on, chemistry grows. So it just happens. The way MSU works.
Sort of like a trust the process type of situation, and you keep putting in those hours and that hard work, and everything just falls into place at the right time.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. I'm pretty sure if you even look at just like the field goal percentages of our players, like they just go up throughout the year. So like that's all it is really, just practicing more and more, and it all clicks eventually.
To go along with that, can you describe what it was like, especially further down the road towards the end of the season when like every game matters? What it's like in the locker room after a really tough loss or a crazy come from behind win where you guys win by 1 or 2 points. Like, what was the environment like in between those two scenarios?
I mean, it's day and night, as you can imagine. A tough road win, you go right back into the locker room, you're throwing water all over it, everyone's excited. And let's just say a tough home loss, whatever, the complete opposite. Everyone just walks into the locker room with their heads down, just ready to, hear it from coach, and that's it. You're done for the night. So it's really just one sucks, one's amazing,
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky enough to cover the team a little bit this year, and I remember, during some of those, we lost at home to Penn State, and when I was at the post game, and Izzo gave his speech, and he was like so quiet. Because you could tell like he had been yelling and screaming, which he had been all game. But I always wonder, like, if he's kind of calm and collected right now, what is it like when he leaves the podium and heads back into the locker room? Like, is everyone getting their head chewed off, or like, what's going on there?
I mean, coach has to coach. If you lost, something went wrong, you gotta correct it. And I mean, yeah, you can imagine. You go in there, you're gonna hear it. You're gonna hear it from coach. He'll point you out if you did a specific thing wrong. And it is what it is. You move on to the next day and you work on it.
Eli, which player on the team would you say you built the best relationship with over the season?
People ask me that all the time. Which has me thinking about it, but I don't think there's really one player. If I had to group them together, it would pretty much be the walk-ons, and I'm sure you can imagine why. They obviously have less time just dealing with the celebrity status and all that, and they like just being considered normal guys also. So and they're also, as you can imagine, in less drills because they got less playing time. So, during practice, they're just off to the side a lot of the times, talking with us, hanging out with us. So the guys like Connor George, Jack Hoiberg, Braden Burke, those guys, I developed a good relationship throughout the year, in practice and even out of it. Like, they would want to hang out sometimes. So they're all good dudes.
For sure. And you traveled with the team to both Illinois and Penn State. So I was just wondering what the general feeling was like, the differences between, a game at the Breslin and a game, someplace you may have never been before.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy different. It's awesome. So at the Breslin, obviously, everyone's cheering MSU. So that's so fun, getting everyone hyped up and whatnot. And then on a road game, it's the opposite because you got everyone chewing at you, and it's fun going back at them. We obviously can't be inappropriate. we're representing the team and whatnot. But when MSU scores, we can turn around, celebrate right back to them. So it's very different, both awesome experiences. And I said, like, at the Breslin, you don't feel like people's eyes are on you. At away games, you kind of do because you're on the MSU bench. Everyone is looking at you, chirping. So it's something.
Lastly, Eli, if there was anything that you could have done differently during the season, what would that be and why?
I'd say that I probably would have asked more questions, to the coaches and whatnot. They're great connections. That's a big reason a lot of managers even do it, is to develop those relationships and whatnot. And although, like, I did develop a relationship, I had many opportunities to ask more questions, and just get advice and all that from players too, which I probably didn't take advantage of enough. But I mean, still with the experience that I had, I don't really have many regrets. Overall, I think it boosted my just overall expertise of basketball, my resume, just me as a person, all that. So I can't say really I have any regrets.
That's great. And then I also have one final question, which is I just wanted you to kind of explain to everyone, watching and listening along, what the manager games are, what that experience is like for you, how much fun that was, and all that.
Yeah. First of all, I had no idea what they were before I got the position. And it's kind of crazy. And they were started at MSU too. So it's literally the night before a real game. The managers often play each other. And obviously no one in the public knows about it, but these games are intense. Like when MSU played Duke in the fall, we played their managers the night before. And it was a 7-point game with like 45 seconds left. And I hit a three, and one of my friends hit a three, and we ended up having a chance to win it at the buzzer. And like we were going crazy. They had Nolan Smith coaching them. We had Tum Tum on our sideline. Like it was absolutely wild. And there's like throughout the country, like every single team is like doing this, and the public just doesn't see it. But it's one of the ultimate like highlights of college for managers. It's awesome.
Yeah, and then kind of going off of that, how did, obviously we were one of the best teams in the country, for, the players and stuff. How did our manager team stack up against the other manager teams that you played?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask that, but
I had to.
We had one win. We had one win.
Hey, that's one more win than
Us.
than a really sad season, and us. So
I'm not gonna lie though, our GA had to play for our one win, so it's not cheating though. It's allowed.
No, yeah.
Play any other game.
Well, Eli, that was a great time talking with you. I really hope that, even though our season was cut short, that you still enjoyed your time spent with the team, and you gained a lot of really cool memories, a great network, and really you made friends for a lifetime with everybody who, played on that team, and even alumni who came through just to, watch their team play. So really fun having you on the show, and thanks for joining in.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. From friends to interviewers, this is a great experience.
So that was our interview with MSU basketball manager Eli Hammer. It was awesome to hear about his stories and experiences with the team this last season. Hopefully we can get him on some other time to hear about more of those stories, possibly with a player or two. We'll have to see about that. But that will drive us into our next discussion of this episode, which is the Lions football schedule for this upcoming year. This past week, the NFL released the schedules for each and every one of the teams, and the Lions, it's looking like a Lions schedule. Well, yeah, we really don't know, what it's going to be. This team loves to disappoint us. Brandon, you got it pulled up in front of you?
Yeah, I'm taking a look at it right now. The first thing that stuck out to me was that we're playing Houston on Thanksgiving, which is strange. because it is tradition that we always play a team in our division, and it's typically the Bears or the Vikings. So it's strange that Houston will be coming to town. I don't know how you felt about that.
Yeah, I also noticed that, and I kind of agree with you because I mean I have memories of going to that game with members of my family and stuff, and it's been the Vikings pretty much every time I've gone. But should be interesting that we're playing a team in the AFC rather than the NFC this year on Thanksgiving, and it's kind of a bummer that the Texans got rid of DeAndre Hopkins because that would have been cool to see him in Detroit during Christmas. But we do get to face off against DeAndre and the rest of the Arizona Cardinals week 3. And we actually led off the season against the Cardinals last year. So, I mean, we've seen a lot of the Cardinals recently. Just kind of going through the schedule right now, I have us pegged somewhere at, 7-9, around 7-9 or around 6-10, which is, not great. Not a positive record, but I mean we've seen what the Lions have done recently, and there's a lot of questions about coaching and about our GM, and it's a must. Martha Ford, who's our owner, has stated it's a must win year for them. So I wouldn't be surprised if those expectations were broken and we actually end up winning a good amount of games because these guys are definitely on the hot seat with their jobs right now.
Yeah. Yeah, you bring up a valid point. Bob Quinn and Matt Patricia returning, and there is a lot of anger and hatred towards those guys still being around, and Martha Ford in general, not spending much money and really trying to turn this team around for the potential that it really has. Jason, I wanted to ask you, at what point during the season do you expect the Lions to be the Lions? So in a sense, when are we going to start flopping?
Here's the thing. It could very well be week 1 right off the bat, but it could also be around week, let's see, what is this? 2, 4, 6, around week 7 or 8 when we our schedule kind of starts heating up a little bit and getting a little tougher, which is our first matchup against the Vikings. But, you would hope that to open the season against the Bears, who we also saw sort of struggle a little bit last year. They're trying to figure things out in their quarterback room right now. You'd hope we would start with a win there. And then immediately after that, the next week we play at Green Bay, which is it's always tough to win in Lambeau. I'm not saying we can't beat the Packers, but that's a game I would expect us to win at home rather than at Green Bay. And we don't play the Packers again until week 15.
Which could be do or die if the Lions decide not to break our hearts this year and are in the hunt. That could be a very big game, and that one's at home too.
I also noticed about the schedule, which could even be a bigger game, 2 weeks after that, we are playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and Tom Brady in Detroit. But what is so interesting is that this game, I believe, is on Christmas Day, or it might not be our game, but I know that the NFL did schedule games this year on Christmas Day, which is the first time they have at least done this in my lifetime. I don't know if they used to do it, but it is usually something they kind of reserved and let the NBA have. And, Christmas is, when I think of Christmas, in terms of the sports, at least, usually it's a big slate of NBA games. So the NFL is trying to combat that a little bit this year and switch it up and see if they can steal some of those viewers away from the NBA. Yeah. And who knows, if it works out well for them, this might be something that we see every season.
Right. Just like we're talking about, in baseball with the universal DH and miking players up. That would be interesting, though, some Friday night football action as Christmas falls on a Friday this year. It's kind of hard to imagine what that would be like. I mean, it's great for anyone who's betting because you have, 5, 6 NBA games, and you'd probably have at least a game or two over in the NFL. So that would be a first, and that would be something that, while we're not used to seeing, would be awesome and something that a lot of fans in the NFL would be looking forward to.
100%. And one more thing that I would like to touch up on about the Lions' schedule. Um, it's a little stat that ESPN Stats and Info tweeted out the other day, and the stat is that the Lions and Redskins are the only two teams without a primetime game scheduled for this upcoming season. Two of the last three teams to have that happen have made the playoffs, which were the Jaguars in 2017 and the Buffalo Bills last season. So, if the trend stays, either us or the Redskins could be in the playoffs this year, which would be very interesting. But as a lot of football fans know, the NFC is very, very tough, and the wild card race is wildly competitive towards the end of the season every year. You got to imagine, at least in the division with the 49ers and the Seahawks, usually one of them is in charge of the division and the other's in a wild card spot. Usually either the Packers or Vikings are kind of in there fighting for the spot. And then between, in the NFC East with the Cowboys and the Eagles, one of them has a division, one of them's fighting for the wild card. So NFC typically a really tough conference to get into a wild card spot. And let's be honest, Lions fans, we're not winning the division this year. I mean, that would be shocking. Right, so that'll do it for our sort of recap and discussion of the Lions and NFL schedule for this upcoming year. But there was some other interesting NFL news that broke out this past week. I'm sure many of you have heard, but Earl Thomas, safety for the Baltimore Ravens and former safety for the Seahawks, considered one of the best safeties in the league, was held at gunpoint in a domestic violence altercation by his wife this past week. Thomas ended up releasing a video on his Instagram before the news broke, trying to get ahead of the story, as some people will do. And he goes on in that video to say, stuff like this happens. It's not that big of a deal. Stuff like this happens. And what we ended up finding out is that Earl Thomas was at his house with his wife. That part's normal. We're good so far. His brother picks him up and they drive off. His wife doesn't really know where he's going or anything like that. And it turns out she somehow tracked him down. I believe it was on Snapchat or something like that.
Yeah, it was Snapchat.
Snapchat maps, man. You got to turn that off if you're smart. But
yeah,
she was hunting him down and finds out that Thomas was in bed with his brother and a couple of other women at an Airbnb. So then that is when she pulled out her firearm and had him at gunpoint. And eventually the police came. Thank God, no one was shot or hurt in any way, obviously, other than the marriage of the Thomases. That definitely took a little bit of a hurting. But I just, stuff like this does not happen, Earl Thomas. I mean, this is very far from the ordinary. And I was honestly shocked to hear this, Brandon.
Well, first things first, the really only good thing to come about this is that it happened in Airbnb, because business for Airbnb, if you haven't heard, has kind of been tanking, considering the whole coronavirus situation. I don't know why he would go about and say these things happen. I mean, that's pretty dumb, because this story is rather uncommon. I wonder how she got the gun. Because it seems like if you think about the scenario and what took place, she's probably on Snapchat and saw where he was, assuming she probably has the brother on Snapchat too and his location. So she was like, well, they're together somewhere and he hasn't been telling me his whereabouts. I wonder what's going on. So she was like, let me just grab the strap just in case, anything happens. Like, something seems a little off with her.
I mean, I don't think she was grabbing the strap to see if something happens. I think she was grabbing the strap out of rage, and she either was threatening the women that were in bed with the Thomas brothers or Earl himself. And apparently there was no magazine in the gun, but there was a round in the chamber. So if she would have pulled the trigger, someone definitely would have gotten seriously injured or hurt. But as you said, this was a pretty big win for Airbnb, who's struggling to get business right now. But what I wanted to mention is they were definitely not social distancing or keeping 6 feet apart by any means. And this is not the time to really be doing that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, what's nice is in a time like this, any sort of news that's sports related, is entertaining. Granted, this scenario might be rather rather obtuse from most scenarios, and this is something that you can't predict. All right, Jason. So we're going to end today's episode with a little talk about predictions, as we were talking about the line schedule earlier and the predictions that we think is going to happen. Let's dive into some crazier predictions that have been made by The Simpsons. And very recently, it was brought out that The Simpsons had predicted about coronavirus and murder hornets, which is like, I just don't get that, because at this point, like, coronavirus, everything sucks. But who would have thought like the next bad thing to happen would be like murder hornets? And how The Simpsons can predict that is just beyond me. But they have that track record, so it's not that,
Yeah,
crazy.
they have predicted the future so many times, and a lot of people are kind of skeptical because they say, well, it's been the longest running show, on TV. There's just so many episodes. They're bound to hit and miss on a couple of them here and there. But Darren Rovell tweeted this out, on apparently this episode aired May 6, 1993. And the plot of the episode was that Springfield got sick with a flu that originated in Asia. And while the town was begging their politicians and their leaders for a vaccine, they knock over this box that says "Danger Killer Bees" on it, and the bees start going around and murdering people.
Terrorizing everyone.
Just in itself, predicting a flu that comes from Asia that infects everyone is crazy. But to have it be 8 seconds away from the danger killer bees, which we know as the murder hornets, I mean, that just seems a little too coincidental for me. I don't really know how I feel about that one. I get a little uncomfortable every time the Simpsons are just spot on about something that's actually happened.
Yeah. And so much so that it leads us to our final segment of the 4 Simpsons predictions of the apocalypse. So I'm going to give 2 of my predictions that are just beyond ridiculous that the Simpsons predicted, and Jason will give his 2. So I'm going to lead us off here, Jason, with the Simpsons predicting the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack, which also, I don't know if you've seen, but Roy was the guy who got bitten by the tiger and was, severely paralyzed. He actually died a couple of days ago. He was like 7. Yeah, crazy time. R.I.P. But it says, so this was in season 5. So considering The Simpsons have more than 30 seasons, this was years and years and years ago. It says, Mr. Burns decided to build a casino in Springfield. There was Gunter and Ernst, a clear Siegfried and Roy analog whose act ends in tragedy when their white tiger, Anastasia, attacks them. Though this one is a bit more understandable given the dangers of working with wild animals, Roy Horn was also attacked 10 years after the episode aired. So a decade in between that episode airing and when that had actually happened. That one is just crazy to me. I don't know how they come up with this stuff, and it does maybe make a little sense considering they're working with a wild tiger. But like, how do you do that?
Yeah, I mean that is pretty crazy, and as you said, working with a wild tiger, as everyone has seen with the Tiger King, can be very dangerous. But my prediction that I think is crazy is that the Simpsons actually predicted the Donald Trump presidency in season 11, episode 17, Bart to the Future. The Simpsons took a peek in the future where Lisa becomes president of the United States. And in a cabinet meeting, she mentions how we inherited quite the budget crunch from President Trump, and talks a little bit about how she inherited that presidency from him, and how things ended up in the United States after he was president. And I mean, this is years before Trump was even thought to be president or running for anything. And at this time he was only known as sort of a TV personality and this rich guy. So it's just crazy that all those years ahead they predicted something like that would happen, and it did end up happening.
Yeah, the Simpsons predicting Trump to be president isn't that out of the ordinary because of who Trump was at the time and how he had his show The Apprentice, and he was like this big guy that was born into all this money. And in a way it's like, well, anybody can be president, and it's like Donald Trump, maybe that could happen years down the road. And sure enough, the Simpsons predicted that. So I'm not really surprised at that one, but it's still quite the coincidence. So my other Simpsons prediction is suing an all-you-can-eat restaurant, which I think this is really funny, and this comes from season 4, episode 8. So it says Homer's hunger is cartoonishly insatiable, so much so that in one episode he gets kicked out of a seafood restaurant after pursuing an all-you-can-eat deal, only to sue for false advertising. This legal discourse has made its way into courts in 2012 and 2017. Ironically enough, the later even happened in Springfield, Massachusetts. That's rather ironic. And it doesn't go into detail about how much sushi was eaten and why that person sued, but it's kind of comical in the sense of like all-you-can-eat restaurants are all-you-can-eat, but there are those people out there that do like food challenges nowadays where they'll go to like a restaurant and see how much they can eat. And it's like not uncommon for them to be kicked out after eating so much.
For my last Simpsons prediction, this comes in 2007, not in the actual show itself, but in the Simpsons movie, which, I have not seen a ton of Simpsons episodes, but I do love the Simpsons movie. I think it's great.
Mm-hmm.
Really fun. But in that movie, Marge discusses her plans to kind of foil the government and tell all their secrets. And when she does this, she is taken to NSA headquarters, and they talk. You see them listening in on everyone's phone calls and trying to catch the most wanted people in America and protect the country, if you will. And you got to remember, this is in 2007, so this was a good 6 years before the whole Edward Snowden thing coming out and talking about how the NSA was actually practicing these activities. So, I mean, those are just a couple of the examples, but if you go online and you look them up, I mean, there is article after article and event after event of The Simpsons accurately predicting things going on in our world.
I'm scared to see any sort of new episodes that The Simpsons come out with where they make any weird scenarios or predictions, because knowing their track record, who knows, it could totally happen sometime in the future. All right, guys, well, that's our show for today. We'd like to thank Eli Hammer for coming on and chatting with us today, and for all of you guys out there that have spent your long days of quarantine and isolation and not leaving the house and not doing anything to spend a little time and listen to Jason and I. So we appreciate that, and there's a lot more to come.
Well said, Brandon. Thank you guys so much for joining us. We really appreciate all the positive things and the support that everyone has given us these past couple weeks. There's definitely more to come, and we can't wait to see you and have you join us again for another episode of Bagels and Locks.
Bagels and Locks is hosted by Brandon Rothenberg and Jason Silverstone. Edited by Brandon Rothenberg, Eli Weil, and Jason Silverstone. Theme music by Eli Weil. Thanks to Eli Hammer for joining us today.